On a chilly autumn morning in the small town of Willow Springs, life was quiet, predictable. The trees stood proudly, their leaves slowly turning shades of amber and crimson, and the air carried that gentle, woodsy scent of a town readying itself for winter. It seemed like any other day for the residents who went about their lives, unaware of the extraordinary events that were about to unfold. 15-year-old Emma Jenkins had never felt more out of place, yet so determined in her life. The story of how she and her younger brother, Ben, ended up here was known to a few in the town, but for most, the Jenkins siblings were just two quiet, unassuming kids. Emma had taken on the role of caregiver for her brother after their parents passed in a tragic car accident a year prior. Ben, just 10 years old, was Emma's entire world. They shared a tiny, run-down apartment in the outskirts of town, scraping by on her small earnings from several part-time jobs. Every day for Emma was a battle. Between school, work, and caring for Ben, she rarely had a moment to herself. She'd drop Ben off at school, then rush to her morning shift at the local diner, barely having enough time to squeeze in her own classes in the afternoon before picking him up again. But today was different. Today, she was planning something daring, something she hoped might change both their lives forever. Ben had been sick for months, and the doctors had told Emma that he needed a surgery they simply couldn't afford. She'd saved every cent she could, but it was never enough. It was a small town, and opportunities were scarce. One afternoon, Emma saw a flyer posted on the community board in the diner where she worked. It advertised a talent show with a grand prize of $10,000, a small fortune to her and enough to cover Ben's medical costs. It was her one shot. Emma had always loved singing. Her mother had taught her a few old songs, and she'd sing to Ben at night to help him sleep. She wasn't sure if she was any good. She'd only ever sung to her brother, and in the privacy of her tiny apartment. But this was no time for doubt. She promised herself she would do anything for him. With no family left, they only had each other. The audition was in the evening at the town hall, but getting there was no easy feat. First, Emma needed to arrange time off from her jobs, something she knew her employers wouldn't be pleased about. She took a deep breath and approached Mr. Watts, her boss at the diner, an older man with a perpetually stern expression. Emma explained her situation as calmly as she could, but he shook his head, unimpressed. "This is the busiest time of the year, Emma. We need every hand we can get," he muttered, but something in her expression must have softened him. With a long sigh, he finally agreed, on the condition that she'd pick up an extra shift later in the week. Next came the issue of getting there. The town hall was a bit of a hike from her apartment, and her shoes had all but worn through. The soles had holes, and the heels flapped with each step, but she couldn't afford new ones. No time to worry about that now, she told herself. Finally, the hour of the audition arrived. Emma left Ben with a neighbor who'd agreed to keep an eye on him. She kissed him on the forehead and whispered, "Wish me luck, kiddo." Ben, with his sweet, tired smile, gave her a thumbs up. "You'll do great, Em. Just sing like you do for me." The streets were already dark as she walked to the town hall, her heart pounding in her chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, and she clutched her jacket around her, more to hold in her nerves than for warmth. She didn't know what to expect. She'd never done anything like this before. As she approached the entrance, she saw a crowd of hopefuls gathered around, each one looking just as nervous, if not more so. When it was finally her turn, Emma felt her heart leap into her throat. She stepped onto the stage, feeling the weight of the audience's eyes on her. The spotlight felt blinding, making the edges of the room seem like a dark void. Her mind raced, and suddenly, her mouth went dry. In the silence, she heard the faint hum of whispers from the crowd. She knew they were judging her, sizing her up before she even opened her mouth. Just as she was about to begin, something went wrong. The microphone crackled, and then went dead. A murmur of laughter rippled through the audience, and Emma's cheeks burned. She could feel her confidence slipping like sand through her fingers. One of the judges motioned to her to wait as they tried to fix the mic, but something inside Emma told her not to let this stop her. She looked out at the crowd, took a deep breath, and began to sing, a cappella, her voice filling the silent room. She chose a song her mother used to sing, one filled with longing and hope. Her voice, though a bit shaky at first, gained strength as she went on, each note carrying her story of love, loss, and determination. Her heart was in every word, every phrase, and soon the room fell silent, captivated by her raw emotion. In that moment, Emma forgot about the judges, the audience, the competition. She was singing for Ben, for the hope of a future where he could be well and happy. She sang like she'd never sung before, her voice echoing in the hall with a vulnerability that silenced the crowd's whispers. When she finished, there was a pause, a silence that hung in the air, almost reverent. Then, unexpectedly, one of the judges, a man she recognized from TV, stood up, wiping a tear from his eye. He began clapping, slowly at first, and soon the entire room erupted into applause. Emma, still standing on stage, couldn't believe it. She felt a wave of relief, mixed with disbelief, wash over her. But just as she was beginning to feel a glimmer of hope, she was called over to the judge's table. The man who'd clapped for her introduced himself as a producer with a small label. He was impressed and offered her a contract on the spot, saying she had a rare talent. The contract came with a large advance, more than enough for Ben's surgery. However, there was a catch. She would have to leave Willow Springs to go on tour, which meant she couldn't stay by Ben's side for his surgery. Emma's heart sank. The opportunity she'd dreamed of was right in front of her, but it demanded a choice she'd never anticipated. Taking the contract meant financial security, a chance to pay for Ben's treatment and build a future for them both. But it also meant leaving Ben, perhaps when he needed her most. The offer hung in the air as Emma wrestled with the decision. She felt the weight of her promise to Ben, but also the gravity of this once-in-a-lifetime chance. She looked at the producer, then back at the crowd, and finally down at her worn shoes. She needed time, but time wasn't on her side. She could almost feel the clock ticking, each second bringing her closer to a decision that would change their lives forever. Emma left the audition that night with a heavy heart, still unsure of what to do. The town hall, once filled with cheers, now felt cold and empty. As she walked back home in the dark, she realized that her life, which had once seemed so predictable, was suddenly filled with choices she never wanted to make. The days following Emma's performance were a whirlwind. Word of her heartfelt audition had spread like wildfire through Willow Springs, surprising her with the attention it garnered. People she barely knew began to offer their praise or advice, each one seemingly having an opinion on the opportunity she now faced. The town, usually content with its simple rhythms, was buzzing with a new energy, all centered around Emma Jenkins, the orphan girl who sang for her brother. For Emma, the attention was as overwhelming as it was uncomfortable. She hadn't sung to be famous or to become the town's topic of conversation. She'd done it for Ben, for a chance to save him. The producer's offer lingered in her mind like an unresolved chord. She replayed his words over and over in her head, weighing every implication of taking the contract. Meanwhile, she still had her everyday responsibilities to handle. As she shuffled through her shifts at the diner, her coworkers whispered about her big break when they thought she wasn't listening. Customers would glance over at her, their eyes filled with a mix of admiration and pity. She could hear snippets of conversation here and there. Such a talented girl, but she's got a hard choice ahead. Imagine leaving your family for a dream like that. And always the lingering judgment. What would her parents think? Mr. Watts, her manager, who rarely showed much interest in anything outside of his diner, even pulled her aside after her shift one day. "Emma, you know, this thing you've got going on. It's a real chance," he said, uncharacteristically serious. "But you think real hard before you make any decision, all right? The world's a lot bigger out there than Willow Springs. not always as kind as this place. She wasn't sure if he meant it as a warning or encouragement. But it wasn't just her shifts at the diner that weighed on her. She still had to care for Ben. That was her priority, no matter what. Each morning, she'd see his thin frame sitting at their small kitchen table, his face pale but smiling, hopeful as always. It was the reason for everything. She would sit across from him, watching him eat his cereal as he talked excitedly about how proud he was of her performance. "You were like a star up there, Em. They'll write about you in the paper. Maybe you'll even be on TV," he'd say with a grin that made her heart both swell and ache. She couldn't bear to tell him the truth about the offer yet, not until she knew what to do. One evening, as Emma was tidying up after dinner, Ben's usual laughter turned into a cough, harsh and deep. She rushed to his side, her heart racing as she rubbed his back, feeling utterly helpless. Every time he had one of these coughing fits, the gravity of his situation hit her all over again. She couldn't waste time or hesitate. Ben's condition was only worsening, and they both knew it. After settling him down that night, Emma sat alone by the window, staring into the darkness. She knew she couldn't keep her dilemma from him any longer. She had to tell him about the offer, no matter how much it hurt. "Ben," she said softly, walking over to sit by his bedside. His eyes fluttered open, and he gave her a sleepy smile. "I need to tell you something, okay?" He nodded, his small hand reaching out to hold hers. Taking a deep breath, she explained everything. The offer, the contract, the money. She told him that this opportunity would mean his surgery could finally happen. His eyes widened with excitement, but his smile faded as she mentioned the catch. She'd have to leave Willow Springs, to be away from him for months, maybe longer. Are you gonna take it?" he asked, his voice a whisper. Emma's heart sank. She didn't know how to answer, didn't know if she could even make that choice. How could she leave him when he was so sick? But how could she refuse the only chance they had? Before she could answer, Ben, with a wisdom beyond his years, gave her a small smile. "Em, you should go. You always sing for me at home, but you're good enough for everyone to hear." "And I'll be okay," he whispered. "You're doing this to help me, right? I'll be here waiting." His words, though simple, struck her deeply. It was almost as if he was giving her permission, letting her go. But she knew it wouldn't be that easy. The ache of leaving him, even for the right reasons, was more than she could bear to consider. The thought of not being there for him, of not holding his hand before the surgery or being there when he woke up, was a wound she wasn't sure would ever heal. The next day, she made her way to the town hall to speak with the producer, her decision still clouded with doubt. As she walked, she felt the eyes of the townspeople on her, each one carrying its own judgment, its own opinion. It was as if everyone in Willow Springs had taken an interest in her life, in her choice. When she finally reached the producer, he greeted her with a confident smile. "So, have you thought it over? We're on a tight schedule, Emma. Talent like yours can't sit around in a small town forever," he said, his words casually dismissive of the life she was so torn about leaving. Emma took a deep breath and tried to explain her hesitation, how much Ben needed her. The producer's expression softened slightly, but he remained firm. "I get it, Emma. But this isn't just about your brother. This is about your future, too. The world needs to hear your voice. Think about all the other kids you could inspire, all the people you could help with your story." His words echoed in her mind. Was it possible that this wasn't just about Ben and her, but something bigger? Could she really make an impact beyond her own life, beyond Willow Springs? Just as she was grappling with these thoughts, an unexpected voice called out her name. Turning, she saw Mrs. Larkin, an elderly woman from the diner who had always been kind to her, despite her quiet demeanor. Mrs. Larkin approached them, carrying a stack of neatly folded bills in her hand. "Emma," she said, her voice soft but resolute, "we all heard about your brother's situation, and we all know how much you love him. I don't have much, but here." She handed Emma the money. It wasn't much, just a few bills, but the gesture stunned her. Soon, other people in the town began to approach her, each one offering whatever little money they had, sharing words of encouragement and small donations. It was as if the entire town of Willow Springs had decided to come together to help her and Ben. Emma felt her eyes filling with tears, overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness. These were people who didn't have much themselves, yet they were willing to give what little they had to help her. By the end of the evening, she found herself holding a small stack of bills, a collection from the people of Willow Springs. It wasn't enough for the surgery, not even clothes, but it was more than she'd ever expected. It was a tangible reminder of the community that had quietly supported her all along, even when she felt alone. Emma looked down at the money, her heart torn. She knew that with the producer's offer, she could give Ben everything he needed, including the surgery. But the outpouring from her community, their small but significant contributions, gave her a new sense of strength. She wasn't just an orphan girl from a small town anymore. She was a part of something bigger. The producer, sensing her hesitation, gave her a final piece of advice. "This doesn't happen to everyone, Emma. Sometimes you have to take risks. You're doing this for him, after all." The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Emma made her way back home, clutching the donations from her community tightly in her hands. Her mind was spinning, her heart heavy. She knew a choice lay before her, a leap into the unknown that might save Ben's life, or staying close to him, trusting that somehow, some way, things would work out. That night, she lay awake, listening to Ben's steady breathing from the next room. She knew he would support her no matter what she chose, but the weight of the decision loomed over her like a shadow. She realized that whatever choice she made, it would change her forever. And that this moment, the choice between her dreams and her family, would define her life. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she couldn't help but wonder if she had the courage to take the leap, and if she did, what it might cost her. For now, all she could do was close her eyes, hold her brother's image in her mind, and pray that, somehow, she would find the answer she needed. The morning after Emma's restless night arrived with a quiet sense of finality. She woke up knowing that today was the day she'd have to make her choice. She could no longer leave her life in limbo, caught between two impossibly difficult paths. As she got ready, she felt the weight of responsibility settle around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Every moment she spent in silence, every glance she stole at Ben, reminded her of what was at stake. After breakfast, she decided to take Ben on a walk to their favorite park, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind and perhaps give her some insight. Ben, as if sensing her need for quiet, held her hand and hummed a tune as they strolled along the tree-lined path. They eventually reached an old bench, shaded by a sprawling oak tree. Emma sat down, pulling her knees close to her chest as Ben climbed onto the bench beside her, resting his head on her shoulder. For a long while, they just sat there, watching the leaves fall, each one spiraling to the ground in a slow, graceful descent. Emma felt that same inevitability about her own life, like she was falling too, pulled by gravity into a decision she couldn't escape. Ben said, breaking the silence, "You're thinking too hard. You always make that face when you're trying to solve a big problem." Emma chuckled softly, trying to mask the anxiety gnawing at her. "Maybe it's because I have a big problem to solve, little man." Ben straightened up, his brow furrowed in thought. "Is it because of the singing job? Are you worried about leaving?" She looked down, biting her lip. The honesty in his question made her feel a strange mixture of guilt and relief. "Yeah, I am. It's a lot to think about, you know. If I go, I can earn the money we need, but that means I won't be here for a while. Maybe for a long time." Ben looked away, scuffing his shoe against the ground. He didn't say anything for a moment, and Emma began to worry she'd burdened him with too much. But then, with the same wisdom he'd shown her the night before, he said quietly, "If you think it's the right thing to do, then it is. I know you'll come back, Em. You're doing it for me, so it can't be wrong." She looked at him, her eyes welling with tears. There was something both heartbreaking and heartwarming in seeing her little brother, so young and fragile, offer her a clarity she couldn't find within herself. But even as she held his hand, Emma's heart twisted with doubt. She couldn't ignore the feeling that once she made this choice, there would be no turning back. Later that day, she found herself once again at the town hall, her heart pounding as she prepared to give her answer to the producer. The building was buzzing with activity. People bustled about, preparing for the talent show finals that would take place the following night. Emma could hear the sound of instruments tuning, singers rehearsing, and judges discussing their schedules. She felt a strange sense of detachment from it all, as though she were watching a life she didn't quite belong to. The producer spotted her as she entered and waved her over. "Emma, just the person I was hoping to see. So, have you thought it over?" Emma nodded, swallowing hard. "I have. And I think I'm going to take the offer. But I need to know, is there any way I could stay here? Just until my brother's surgery is done. He needs me right now, more than ever." The producer sighed, scratching his head. "Emma, I get where you're coming from. I really do. But the tour schedule's tight. The label's investing a lot, and they're expecting you to be ready as soon as possible. We can't afford to delay." Emma's heart sank, but she knew this was the answer she'd expected. Nothing in life came without sacrifices. She'd learned that much already. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Then I'll do it. I'll go on tour. Just let me say goodbye to Ben." The producer patted her shoulder. "You're making the right choice, kid. Not everyone gets this kind of opportunity, and I have a feeling you're going to go far." With the decision made, Emma returned home with a sense of finality. Though it wasn't exactly peace, she and Ben shared a quiet dinner that night, and she struggled to keep her emotions in check as she watched him eat, his face still alight with that childlike innocence she cherished so deeply. They didn't talk much. Words felt inadequate to express everything she wanted to say. She just sat with him, holding on to the moment, knowing it might be a while before they shared another meal like this. The next morning, she began preparing to leave. Packing was a bittersweet task. She didn't have much to bring, just a small bag with her few personal belongings and a photograph of her and Ben. As she zipped up the bag, she felt an overwhelming urge to leave something behind for him, something he could look at whenever he missed her. She picked up her mother's locket from her dresser, the only keepsake she had left. She held it for a moment, feeling the cool metal against her palm, then placed it on Ben's bedside table with a small note that simply said, "For when you need me." When the time came for her to say goodbye, Ben hugged her tightly, his small arms wrapping around her with surprising strength. "Promise you'll come back, Em," he whispered, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I promise," she replied, her voice barely holding steady. She fought back tears, not wanting to let him see how scared she was. She needed to be strong, for both of them. As she walked away, the reality of her decision hit her like a wave. She was leaving Willow Springs, leaving Ben, leaving everything she'd ever known. She felt a mixture of excitement and dread, a feeling of both loss and hope. But she held on to the thought that she was doing this for Ben, that every step forward was a step toward his healing. The tour started almost immediately. Emma was swept up into a world of rehearsals, travel, and late-night performances, a whirlwind of lights, sound, and excitement. She was performing in front of hundreds of people every night, something she'd only dreamed of. She could feel herself improving, growing more confident with each performance. Her voice found new depths and strength, her stage presence blossomed, and she discovered a part of herself that had been hidden, waiting for this moment. But each night, as she stood in front of the crowd, her heart ached for Ben. She imagined him waiting for her, growing a little stronger each day, holding on to her promise. She sent every paycheck home, hoping it would reach him in time for his surgery. The producer often reminded her to stay focused, to keep her mind on her performance, but her thoughts were always half a world away with her brother. Several weeks into the tour, she received a letter from Mrs. Larkin. She eagerly tore it open, her heart racing as she scanned the words. Mrs. Larkin's familiar handwriting filled her with warmth, but her excitement faded as she read the news. Ben's surgery had been postponed. The small amount of money she'd been sending, along with the town's contributions, still wasn't enough. Emma felt the weight of despair settle on her shoulders. She'd left home, left Ben, and was sacrificing everything. But it still wasn't enough. The producer noticed her sudden drop in spirit and pulled her aside. "Emma, you're losing focus. You can't let yourself get distracted by things back home. You have a gift, and you're letting it go to waste by worrying all the time." She looked at him, desperation in her eyes. "I have to help him. Isn't there anything we can do? Can't we organize a fundraiser, a benefit concert, something?" The producer sighed, shaking his head. "Emma, that's not how things work. You're under contract now. You need to keep up with the tour." Feeling trapped, Emma pushed on, determined to fulfill her commitment, but increasingly haunted by the thought of Ben. She couldn't stand the idea of him suffering, waiting for her. In each town, she would search for ways to send more money, even begging the stage crew and musicians for any spare change they could contribute. She became known among them for her tenacity, her unwavering focus on her brother's recovery, and soon her story spread. One night, after a performance, a wealthy audience member approached her, a man who had been moved by her story. He offered to match her earnings from that night, doubling the money she could send home. Emma, filled with gratitude, accepted without hesitation. With renewed hope, she performed each night, gathering donations wherever she could, tirelessly sending every cent back to Willow Springs. Finally, after months of struggle, she received word that the money had arrived, and Ben's surgery was scheduled. She felt a wave of relief unlike anything she'd ever known. In the days leading up to the operation, she counted down the hours, praying for his safety, for his health, for her choice to be worth the separation. The night of his surgery, she stood on stage, singing with all the love and hope she had in her heart. She poured her soul into each note, every song a tribute to Ben, her little brother, her reason for everything. Emma's performance that night was one of the most emotional of her entire tour. She sang as if her voice could somehow reach across the miles and wrap around Ben, comforting him, supporting him. She didn't know if he was out of surgery yet, didn't know if he was safe, but she sang as though every note was a prayer for his healing, a promise of her love and strength. The audience sensed something powerful in her performance that night. Even those who had seen her many times before felt the depth of her emotions. After the show, Emma sat in her dressing room, her heart heavy with anxiety. She clutched her phone, waiting for a call from Mrs. Larkin or one of the doctors. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one filled with a torturous silence. Finally, well after midnight, her phone buzzed. She answered immediately, barely able to breathe as she held the phone to her ear. "Emma." It was Mrs. Larkin's voice, warm and familiar, though she sounded tired. "Mrs. Larkin, it's he. Did he make it?" Emma's voice trembled, her heart pounding as she waited for the answer. Mrs. Larkin's voice softened. "He did, sweetheart. Ben's out of surgery, and the doctor said it went well. He's still recovering, but they're optimistic. He's asking for you, though. Wants to know when his big sister's coming home." Emma felt a rush of relief so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. She could barely speak, her words choked by tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Larkin. Please, tell him I'll be there as soon as I can." The call ended, and Emma sat there in the silence of her dressing room, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and exhaustion. For the first time since she'd left Willow Springs, she allowed herself to fully feel the weight of everything she'd been carrying. The sacrifices, the nights spent worrying, the endless hours of singing, all for this moment. She had done it. Ben was safe, and she had kept her promise. The following days passed in a haze of anticipation. Emma was still under contract for the tour, But the producer, moved by her dedication and her story, agreed to let her return home for a short visit. He arranged for a break in her schedule, a rare act of kindness that Emma knew was not typical in the industry. She packed her bags with a mix of excitement and trepidation, hardly able to believe she would see Ben again. When she arrived back in Willow Springs, the whole town seemed to have gathered to welcome her home. People lined the streets, waving and cheering as she stepped off the bus, their faces beaming with pride and admiration. Emma felt a surge of gratitude for her community, for the people who had supported her and Ben, even when she'd felt alone and unsure. They had all come together for her family, and their warmth and generosity had carried her through the darkest moments. Mrs. Larkin was waiting for her at the edge of the crowd, a smile on her face and tears in her eyes. She wrapped Emma in a tight hug, whispering, "You did it, Emma. You saved him. We're all so proud of you." Emma hugged her back, overwhelmed by emotion. As the crowd began to disperse, she turned to see Ben waiting on the front steps of Mrs. Larkin's house, his face pale but lit with a smile. He was thinner than she remembered, his eyes a little darker. But he was there, alive, breathing, and whole. She ran to him, dropping her bags as she pulled him into her arms. "Ben," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "I missed you so much." He hugged her tightly, his small arms clinging to her as though he'd never let go. "I knew you'd come back, Em. I knew it," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet strength that reminded her of how much he'd endured. They spent the next few days together, catching up on everything they'd missed. Emma told him stories from her tour, making him laugh with tales of backstage mishaps and the strange quirks of her fellow performers. Ben listened with wide eyes, his laughter filling the air as he marveled at the adventures his sister had experienced. She could see how proud he was of her, and it filled her with a sense of accomplishment she'd never felt before. But as the days slipped by, Emma began to feel a familiar weight pressing down on her. She knew her time in Willow Springs was limited. She would have to return to the tour soon. She dreaded the moment she'd have to say goodbye again, but she tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing on enjoying every precious second with Ben. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ben looked up at her with a serious expression. "Are you going to keep singing, Em? On the tour, I mean?" Emma hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She had achieved everything she'd set out to do. Ben's surgery was paid for, and he was on the road to recovery. But the experience of performing, of sharing her voice with the world, had awakened something in her that she couldn't ignore. She discovered a part of herself she didn't want to lose, even if it meant leaving home again. "I think I have to, Ben," she replied, her voice soft. "I found something I love, something that makes me feel alive. And I think Mom and Dad would want me to follow that, as hard as it is to be away from you." Ben nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I know. You're really good, Em. And you've already helped me so much. I don't want you to stop because of me." His words touched her deeply, and she pulled him into another hug. "I'll always come back, Ben. No matter where I go, I'll come back for you." The next morning, the town held a small ceremony in her honor, a celebration of both her talent and her dedication to her brother. The mayor gave a short speech, praising her bravery and the way she'd brought the community together. Emma accepted their gratitude humbly, but her heart was heavy with the knowledge that she would soon be leaving them all again. As she prepared to depart once more, Mrs. Larkin approached her with a final gift, a scrapbook filled with clippings, photos, and letters from the people of Willow Springs. They'd documented her journey, from her audition to her tour, capturing every moment of pride and support. Emma flipped through the pages, her heart swelling with emotion as she read the notes of encouragement and saw the smiling faces of her neighbors. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I'll carry this with me wherever I go." With a final round of goodbyes, Emma boarded the bus, her hand pressed against the window as she waved to Ben and Mrs. Larkin. She watched as Willow Springs faded into the distance, her heart torn between the family she was leaving behind and the future that lay ahead. Back on tour, Emma poured herself into her performances with a new sense of purpose. She sang not only for herself but for Ben, for her community, and for everyone who had believed in her. Each night, she could feel the love and support of Willow Springs in her voice, their presence a comforting reminder of where she'd come from and the people who were rooting for her success. Months went by, and her fame continued to grow. Her story, of the young girl who had sung to save her brother's life, captivated audiences everywhere, and her voice became a symbol of hope and resilience. People began to recognize her on the streets, asking for autographs and telling her how much her journey had inspired them. One evening, as she stepped off the stage after a particularly moving performance, a woman approached her, holding a young girl by the hand. "Emma," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion, "my daughter has been going through a tough time, but your music, it's given her so much strength. You have no idea how much it's meant to us." Emma knelt down, smiling at the young girl. "Thank you for telling me. That means the world to me. Just remember, no matter what, you're stronger than you think." As she continued on her journey, Emma realized that her story was no longer just her own. She had become a symbol for others, a reminder of the power of resilience, family, and community. And even though she missed Ben with every fiber of her being, she knew that her journey was about more than just herself. She was singing not only for her brother, but for everyone who had ever felt lost, for everyone who had ever needed hope. Finally, after a year on the road, Emma returned home to Willow Springs, her tour completed and her heart full. She stepped off the bus, and there was Ben, waiting for her with that familiar, radiant smile. She ran to him, pulling him into a hug, and knew in that moment that everything she'd done, every sacrifice she'd made, had been worth it. The town welcomed her back with open arms, celebrating not just her success, but the strength and unity they had found through her story. Emma knew she would continue to sing, that her voice would carry her to new places, but she also knew she would always return to Willow Springs, to her brother, to the place that had made her who she was. As the sun set over the town, casting a warm, golden glow over the streets, Emma looked out over her community, feeling a deep sense of peace. Her journey had been long, and the challenges had. As Emma settled back into life in Willow Springs, she felt a profound sense of belonging and contentment that was different from anything she'd experienced on the road. The town was her anchor, the place that reminded her of her roots and everything she had sacrificed for Ben. Although she'd found success and recognition through her singing, she knew in her heart that coming home was what mattered most. Her return was met with a celebration that went beyond what she could have ever imagined. The people of Willow Springs organized a large community event in her honor, filling the town square with music, food, and laughter. Strings of lights hung between buildings, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Emma was deeply moved by the outpouring of love from her neighbors, people who had seen her grow from a quiet, determined girl into a resilient young woman with a powerful story. They had supported her when she was struggling, and now they celebrated her triumphs as if they were their own. During the event, the mayor called for a moment of silence, then raised his voice to announce, "Emma Jenkins has not only shown us the power of dreams, but the strength of family and community. She's reminded us that even the smallest town can make a big impact. Emma, you've become a symbol of hope for us all." The applause that followed was deafening, echoing through the square as Emma stood on stage, humbled and emotional. She thanked everyone, her voice breaking slightly as she expressed her gratitude for their unwavering support. But as she spoke, she could see something deeper in their faces, a kind of pride that went beyond her achievements. They were proud not just because she had become famous, but because she had stayed connected to them, to her family and her community, even as her world had expanded. After the speeches, the festivities continued, and Emma found herself surrounded by familiar faces, each person wanting to share their pride, their admiration, and their gratitude. She spoke with old friends and neighbors who shared memories of her as a little girl, tales of her parents, and the stories that made Willow Springs feel like a living scrapbook of her life. As the night went on, she realized how much she had missed these simple moments, the warmth and authenticity of her hometown. But it wasn't just her life that had changed during her absence. Emma quickly noticed that her journey had sparked something new in Willow Springs. The people of her town, inspired by her story, had begun to focus on ways they could help each other. The community had rallied not only for Ben's surgery but for others in need. Inspired by the sense of unity that Emma's journey had brought, they had started a local fund to support families going through hard times. They called it the Jenkins Fund, in honor of Emma and Ben. Emma was deeply touched when she learned about the fund. Mrs. Larkin, who had been a central figure in organizing it, explained, "After we saw what you did for Ben, Emma, we realized that we all had the power to help. Your story reminded us that sometimes it just takes a little bit of love and determination. We wanted to make sure no one here would ever feel as alone as you did." The Jenkins Fund quickly became a cherished part of the community. Families who had once struggled in silence now had a place to turn. People began volunteering their time, hosting events, and organizing drives to raise money for the fund. Emma, moved by the kindness of her community, dedicated herself to helping however she could. She used her platform and her music to bring attention to the fund, even organizing a charity concert in Willow Springs, which brought people from neighboring towns and raised more money than the community had ever seen. As the months passed, Emma became more involved in local projects. Her fame brought attention to Willow Springs, and she used her influence to highlight the beauty and resilience of her town. But even as she embraced her role as a public figure, she never forgot her roots. Her relationship with Ben grew stronger as he recovered, and they spent hours together, catching up on everything they had missed during her time away. One sunny afternoon, as they sat on the porch together, Ben turned to her, his eyes filled with a sense of purpose that she hadn't seen in him before. "Em, you've done so much for me. Now it's my turn to help people, too." Emma looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I want to volunteer with the Jenkins Fund," he said, his voice steady. "I want to help other kids who need surgery or families who need support. If it weren't for you, for the whole town, I wouldn't be here today. I want to give back." Emma's heart swelled with pride as she saw the determination in her brother's eyes. Ben's illness had once made him feel weak and helpless, but now he was ready to make a difference in the lives of others. She could see that he was growing into his own person, strong and compassionate, with a depth of understanding far beyond his years. With Ben's involvement, the Jenkins Fund took on a new life. He became a symbol of resilience and hope, just as Emma had. Together, they spoke at local events, sharing their story and encouraging others to join their cause. Their speeches were simple but powerful, reminding people that no one should have to face hardship alone. Ben's presence and vulnerability inspired a sense of compassion in the community that continued to grow and spread. But just when everything seemed perfect, an unexpected twist shook Emma's world once again. One day, she received a call from her manager in the music industry, offering her a major contract with an internationally renowned label. The offer was beyond anything she could have imagined. A chance to record her own album, tour internationally, and reach an even wider audience. This was the kind of opportunity that could take her career to the next level, but it also meant leaving Willow Springs and the life she had rebuilt with Ben. Emma was torn. She had found a purpose and a sense of peace in Willow Springs, working with Ben and the Jenkins Fund. She loved the life they had created together, the sense of belonging and fulfillment that came from helping others. But the prospect of this new career opportunity pulled at her, awakening a desire she thought she had put aside. The desire to share her voice with the world and make a difference on a larger scale. She spent days wrestling with her decision, unable to sleep as she weighed the pros and cons. She confided in Mrs. Larkin, who listened with understanding, offering words of wisdom without judgment. She discussed it with Ben, who told her that he would support her no matter what, but she could tell he was afraid of losing her again. One evening, Emma took a walk through Willow Springs, her heart heavy with indecision. She passed the park bench where she and Ben had once sat, where he had first told her to follow her dreams. She thought about the promises she had made to him and to herself, the sacrifices they had both endured to get to this moment. As she walked, she encountered familiar faces, people who had helped her, people she had helped in return. Each one stopped to chat, sharing small stories of how the Jenkins Fund had impacted their lives. One woman thanked her for inspiring her son, who had found confidence through the fund's youth program. An elderly man, who had received support for his medical expenses, clasped her hands and blessed her, saying, "You've given us hope, Emma. You and Ben have shown us that even in the hardest times, we can still stand together." Emma felt a surge of clarity. Her heart told her that her purpose wasn't just in her voice, but in the impact she could make here, in Willow Springs. She realized that fame and success weren't what she truly wanted, not if they meant leaving behind the people who needed her most. That night, Emma made her decision. She called her manager, thanking him for the opportunity but explaining that her heart was in Willow Springs. She wanted to continue her music career, but she knew that her place was at home, using her talent to help her community and support the Jenkins Fund. She would still perform and record music, but on her own terms, balancing her career with her commitment to her hometown. The community was overjoyed when they heard her decision. Willow Springs became a hub of activity, with more people volunteering, more families seeking support, and new ideas blossoming as Emma and Ben worked together to expand the Jenkins Fund. Emma continued to sing, her voice now even more powerful because it carried the love and resilience of her town. The community was overjoyed when they heard her decision. Willow Springs became a hub of activity, with more people volunteering, more families seeking support, and new ideas blossoming as Emma and Ben worked together to expand the Jenkins Fund. Emma continued to sing, her voice now even more powerful because it carried the love and resilience of her town. She performed at local events, organized charity concerts, and even recorded an album with songs dedicated to her journey and the people who had supported her. As time went on, Emma's influence spread far beyond Willow Springs. Her story was shared in magazines, newspapers, and online, inspiring other small communities to come together and create their own funds and support systems. She became a symbol not of fame, but of compassion and resilience, proof that one person could make a difference in the lives of many. Emma had come full circle. She had achieved success not by leaving her roots, but by embracing them. She and Ben grew up, their bond stronger than ever, each supporting the other as they navigated their shared mission. Willow Springs was no longer just a small town. It was a beacon of hope and a testament to the strength of community. And through it all, Emma continued to sing, her voice carrying the love, the heartache, and the triumphs of her journey. She had found her place, her purpose, and her calling, all in the town that had never stopped believing in her. Years passed, and Willow Springs blossomed into something no one could have anticipated. What had once been a quiet, almost forgotten town was now a symbol of resilience and unity, attracting attention from communities near and far. People came to learn from their initiatives, inspired by the Jenkins Fund and the story of how one girl's determination to save her brother had led an entire town to discover the power they held together. Emma and Ben had become local legends, but they remained deeply grounded, always mindful of their roots. Emma's music career had evolved in a way that allowed her to balance her life in Willow Springs with her growing influence beyond it. She recorded songs with the help of local musicians, and her albums, now celebrated globally, told stories of family, love, sacrifice, and the beauty of a small town's unwavering support. She continued to perform charity concerts and volunteer with the Jenkins Fund, which had grown into a substantial foundation that served not only Willow Springs but neighboring towns as well. Ben, too, had found his calling within the community. As he grew older, he took on more responsibilities with the Jenkins Fund, working to expand its reach and implement new programs for children facing medical and emotional challenges. Having faced his own struggles and triumphs, he was able to connect with the kids in a way that gave them strength. He organized after-school programs, mentorship opportunities, and scholarships, and he became an advocate for children's health care, traveling to share the importance of community support in overcoming life's hardest battles. He and Emma often worked together on these projects, and their bond was a shining example to everyone around them, showing that family could be the most powerful force of all. One summer, Emma and Ben decided to host a massive community festival to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Jenkins Fund. They wanted to thank the town and show appreciation for everything it had given them. As word spread, people from all over the state and even further began making plans to attend, and the town's population was expected to double for that weekend alone. Willow Springs prepared eagerly, with each family contributing in some way, baking pies, setting up games, arranging music stages, and organizing activities for the children. The air buzzed with excitement, and Emma and Ben poured their hearts into planning the event, hoping it would be a celebration everyone would remember. On the first day of the festival, Emma stood on the main stage, looking out over the crowd. Hundreds of people had gathered, from locals to visitors who had come to be part of the story they'd heard so much about. Children ran around, their faces painted and their hands sticky with cotton candy, while families sat on picnic blankets, enjoying the sunshine and live music. The festival grounds were filled with laughter and music, a testament to how far the town had come. Emma stepped up to the microphone, her heart full as she looked out at the crowd. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I first started singing, it was to save my brother's life. I thought it was a one-time thing, a moment of bravery that would get us through a dark time. But it became so much more than that. It brought us all together, showed us what we're capable of when we support each other. Today isn't just about Ben and me. It's about each of you, every person who's been a part of this journey. You've given us more than we could ever give back." As she spoke, she felt a familiar wave of gratitude and love for her community, a feeling that never faded no matter how many times she expressed it. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers filling the summer air. Emma then stepped back and began to sing one of her most beloved songs, a piece she had written about Willow Springs, her family, and the power of resilience. Her voice carried over the crowd, blending with the laughter and the music, creating a memory that would be etched in everyone's hearts forever. Later in the evening, Emma and Ben sat side by side on a small hill overlooking the festival grounds, watching as people danced, laughed, and celebrated. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the scene, and Emma felt a profound sense of peace. It was as if the journey they had started so many years ago had finally come full circle, bringing them to a place where they could share their love and gratitude with everyone who had been part of it. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if things had been different?" Ben asked, his voice soft. Emma thought for a moment, looking out over the town. "Sometimes, but I wouldn't trade any of it, not for anything. Every challenge, every sacrifice, it brought us here. And here is exactly where we're supposed to be." Ben nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, it feels like we've made something lasting, something that'll go on even when we're not here." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars began to appear in the evening sky. The festival continued around them, filled with the sounds of joy and connection. For a moment, they simply enjoyed the beauty of the moment, knowing that they had created something that would live on in the hearts of everyone there. As night fell, a local news crew arrived to interview Emma and Ben about their journey, hoping to capture the magic of the festival and share it with an even larger audience. Emma, though humbled by the attention, agreed, wanting to share the story of Willow Springs with others who might be inspired by it. She and Ben spoke honestly, recounting their struggles, their triumphs, and the countless people who had helped them along the way. The interviewer asked Emma, "What advice would you give to someone who's facing their own struggles, someone who might feel like they're alone. Emma thought for a moment, then replied, "I'd tell them to reach out, to believe in the power of community, even when it feels like there's no one there. Sometimes the people around you are just waiting for a chance to help. You don't have to do everything on your own." I learned that here, in Willow Springs, and it's a lesson that changed my life. The festival lasted well into the night, with people dancing under the stars and children playing until they could barely keep their eyes open. When it was finally over, Emma and Ben helped clean up, working alongside their neighbors as they had done countless times before. The town square, now quiet and empty, held the remnants of a celebration that would be remembered for years to come. In the following weeks, Emma continued her work with the Jenkins Fund, traveling occasionally to share her story, but always returning home. She released more music, each album filled with songs inspired by her journey and her connection to Willow Springs. Her albums became a blend of her personal experiences and the stories of those she'd met, touching the hearts of listeners around the world. Ben, meanwhile, expanded the Jenkins Fund's reach, bringing new resources to the town and developing partnerships with other communities. The fund's mission grew to include scholarships, healthcare support, and even educational programs, all aimed at empowering individuals to rise above their circumstances. His own experiences gave him a unique insight into what people needed, and he dedicated himself fully to making a difference. As the years went by, the Jenkins siblings continued to impact the lives of those around them, each in their own way but always together. Emma's voice became a beacon of hope, her songs a reminder of the strength that could be found in love and resilience. Ben's work with the fund grew into a legacy that would live on, helping countless families long after he was gone. And yet, for all the changes, Willow Springs remained the same in the ways that mattered most. It was still the town that had come together for Emma and Ben, still the place where neighbors supported one another and where every challenge was met with courage and kindness. The Jenkins Fund became a fixture in the town's identity, a symbol of what they could achieve when they stood together. One summer evening, years after that first festival, Emma and Ben sat once again on the hill overlooking Willow Springs. They watched the sunset, just as they had so many times before, feeling a quiet peace that came from knowing they had created something lasting. They had taken their pain, their struggles, and their love, and transformed them into something beautiful, something that would continue to inspire and uplift their community for generations. As they sat there, Emma turned to Ben, a smile on her face. "Do you ever wonder what the future holds for Willow Springs?" Ben shrugged, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "I don't know exactly, but I know it'll be bright, Em. Because no matter what happens, people here will always remember what we stood for. They'll remember that we showed them what's possible." Emma nodded, looking out over the town that had shaped them, supported them, and loved them through every hardship. In that moment, she felt a profound gratitude, a sense of peace that filled her heart. They had built something that would last, something that would carry on long after they were gone. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, they sat in silence, content in the knowledge that they had come full circle, that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would shine in Willow Springs forever.